All right. This is La Révolution Française. It's one of the most addictive games I own for me to play solitaire. I've had some enjoyment playing it with other people as well, but it's never been quite the same. It's a big 6-player game covering, it's not that big. It's playable probably in 4 to 6 hours, I would guess. Covering the French Revolution's, not the earliest period and not the later periods. Basically, from a point where the Constitutional Convention was first in play, trying to decide just what kind of government they were going to have while the king's still alive, etc. Up until just before the establishment of the Directorate, it's possible to get other forms of government that didn't actually happen using the optional rules, which of course I'll be using. So we've got 6 players. Let me go over them briefly. We've got the Royalists, who essentially want to restore the divine right monarchy. The Filons, who desire a constitutional monarchy. They want the king in place, and they want, well, we'll go into what else they want, but they want somewhat more limits on the powers. The Marais, these guys are the wild cards. They want anything. They want just about any regime, just so long as it's not too extreme. Historically, what they are is the people who did not want the terror particularly. They didn't want the king to be overly powerful. In game terms, what they want is whichever form of government is formed, they want it to be very tempered. In terms of, they want the other side to be stronger. The side that wouldn't have gotten that government in place. Now that sounds dangerous in some ways, but they're actually almost invariably the winners. Which I think is a matter of the scoring system is kind of skewed. I'd like to play with that at some point. These are the Girondins. These are the Federalists. They wanted to A, abolish the kingdom, and B, make sure that France had a similar to the U.S. in terms of the division of power between local and sort of a federal stance. Then we go to the more extremes, and these are the people who essentially rode the terror. The Montagne, and then the Sans-Culottes. And of course, Sans-Culottes stands for those without pants. All right. There are a number of things which sort of drive this game, and I want to get a feel for those more than the mechanics or anything. One of them is the areas you control. And there's little markers, colored markers, in the areas indicating the different groups. Here we have a royalist stronghold. That's actually the Vendée. We have the Girondins up in the north. We have the Montagne only in Lille. The Sans-Culottes only in Marseille. There's a lot of territory held by the moderate Marais and a lot held by the Filons. The numbers here indicate the tax value. And tax value is collected both by the owner of the province, in terms of the political faction which owns it, and also by the government itself. And the government has a big pile of money, some 2,300 assignats. And each of the factions have money as well, the highest being 1,400 for both the Filons and the Girondins. We have a turn record track. The game goes 8 turns, period, the end, unless something extreme happens, like a royalist reinstating the monarchy. There are a couple other automatic ending situations, but that's the one that's most likely. We're going to keep track of the order of play here. That's selected each turn. Based on this. And this is very important. This is the renown of each of the different parties, including the government itself. And we have the different parties listed here, and then kind of in the center there on the 10 space, the guy without a symbol, that's the government itself. That affects your chance of doing anything. And there's basically a unified resolution chart, and you want to get A's, you don't want to get C's. They have differing effects on different things. But in general, you roll on a column based on your fame, your renown, whatever. And the higher your renown, the better the column you're on. Okay. What else do we have? We have the National Assembly. In some periods, this always has some value. But in the initial legislative period, and in the convention where the Constitutional Convention actually starts, it's got a lot more power where it directly can vote on all laws. So political parties have to actually raise a law as a bill, essentially, and then it's voted here in the Assembly. And interestingly enough, this is where the right and left-wing concept come from. You have the Filons, who during the Revolution were probably the most conservative people with any real say at any time, sitting on the right of the chamber, and then over on the left you have the Girondins, the Montagny, and the Sans-Culottes. Now the Montagny and Sans-Culottes aren't viewed as a real party at this point. These aren't really parties, but they aren't viewed as a real I can't remember the proper term, but essentially a faction. Current. They aren't viewed as a proper current of thought at the time. They were really just extremists within the Girondin wing. And then we have the Marais, who didn't really formulate strong political stances. This was a lot of people, a lot of the bourgeoisie here. And hidden within them are the royalists. Now, being a royalist, no one officially supported royalist views. This was definitely set up, the legislature was set up without that concept. It doesn't make any sense. You can't dissolve the legislature. So what happens with these is the hidden factions suffer the same fate if somebody's outlawed or something as the group that they're hiding in. And that's kind of an interesting piece of it. You don't have any choice who you get to hide with. And then we have these 4 tracks here, and they keep track of 4 things. There's 4 different ones. Yeah, let's just keep babbling the same thing. The top one, the red one, is the Commune of Paris. That's how active the Commune is. Now, it was very, very important during the Revolutionary period and can have huge sway on what the government does, and can also be used during coups. Second one, the green one, is the economy. The French economy in this period was a problem. In fact, that's probably why the revolution actually started. The country had suffered bankruptcies. It was clearly on a route for another one. No one knew what to do about it. Whenever they hired people to try to open up a free market concept and limit price controls, people would end up starving and revolting. So it's really a problem because allowing the free market to set prices was understood at that time as being the way to get the economy under control. And the inflation, tremendous inflation. But in the game, as at the time, there are political reasons why you don't want to allow that to happen. So anyway, each of these charts is divided into 3 zones, and in the Commune of Paris, it affects how reputable the Sans-Culottes and Montagny are. As it gets more and more active, they become more capable of doing things outside of just their fame value. The economy is how many times the base cost you have to pay. So while it's in the first zone, you pay the base cost, but as it goes up, you could end up paying 3 times. Next is dissident clergy. And this really is the focus for the royalist support. It may not entirely consist of clergy, but anyway, it improves their particular ability to do things, as well as providing them with some additional funding. Finally, there's the coalition, which, as that goes up, more funding goes to the royalists. But if it goes high enough, a state of war exists. Now, historically, the French actually declared war on their enemies, as it were. In the midst of a civil war, they decided to declare war on coalition powers that were intervening in them. But it's also possible that the coalition could just enter the war on its own. And where we see these kind of gray arrows coming from off the map, that's the paths of the different armies. There's some glitches in them in terms of printing. Some of them are in the wrong situations. But they give you a basic idea of what the attempts of different armies would be as they march through the countryside. So you're saying, what armies? Well, we got a few on the board. Here's a revolutionary army. And not a lot of information in them. They're just armies. And if you get enough odds, you get a bonus on the die roll when you fight combats. Okay, let me think what else. There's so much to this game. I mean, it's got like a 40-page rule book, but it's not that long a game for that kind of rule book. So it's kind of weird. So you have a number of different actions that you can play in a turn. Some of them are convincing areas to support you. Some of them are convincing other personalities, and that's got little counters with pictures of all the big players and all the different coalitions. Convincing personalities who are capable of being on your side to switch sides and then become one of yours. And people are very important. They have connections to specific areas and they help you do actions. However, money is usually more of a limiting factor than people. Okay. So the government also takes actions and uses its cash, and it can do things like arrest people who it doesn't like. At this point in the game, the only people it doesn't like are some of the royalists can be arrested, and a couple of the sans-culottes. Basically, the extremes on each side. Once you get into the terror, a lot of people can be arrested. And arrests right now put you in prison. Arrests during the terror usually separate you from your head. Money each turn, I forgot to mention this, is dumped into this space. And at the end of the turn, it's counted up and increases the economy. There's random events in the game. And there's just a pile of these for each different... there's basically 4 different random events. One on the economy, one on politics, one on the commune, and one on the counter-revolution. Essentially following these charts and modified by them. It's also affected by, of course, the particular political regime in place. And the events are tailored to the regimes. So some things can happen in periods that they won't be able to happen anything like that again. Especially after someone important dies, like the king. Okay. So, victory conditions. Okay. These are just complex and weird, and they're what makes the game probably the weirdest. Here's a little chart I drew up to explain how you can get from any particular political regime to another, and who wants to be where. And I found this very helpful as a cheat sheet for me. we should zoom in on it some more. This is where a lot of the complexity of the game is. So, in terms of winning the game, certain factions want certain regimes. It doesn't matter how well you're doing on the board. If you got the wrong regime up there, you're just not going to do well. You're probably going to place 5th or 6th. On the other hand, if you get the right regime up there, you still don't necessarily win if you're the one doing the best. Now, the Royalist is the one exception to this. If they do well enough, it doesn't matter what the regime is. If they can get enough points, they can reinstall the monarchy. But for all the other powers, it's how many players who are reactionary versus how many players are revolutionary, and which side you want to be on. And this is where the Marais are so interesting. So let me give a quick example for the first one. Yeah, we got a nice thick rule book here. These are all the different regimes. And each has their own little special rules. Okay. So here's, this is just the victory point? No. Yeah, this is the rankings. So if, for example, the regime is legislative and you're the Foulon, the Foulon win. If the Foulon win and the regime's legislative, the ranking of the other players is just determined having nothing to do with how many points they have. It just has to do with, okay, what did we end up with? And can we settle that? All right, so here's, let me try to see, right, here's the division of the different groups, some being reactive, some being revolutionary. And a group votes, if it's doing poorly, it votes the opposite of its direction. So then you look at the particular regime. So let's look at the legislative regime. And if it came out reactionary, what that means is if there were more players who voted reactionary, according to this chart here, than voted revolutionary, it goes reactionary. On the opposite side, if more vote revolutionary, if the revolutionary players are winning, it votes revolutionary. So what your presence is on the board isn't necessarily that important. In the case of the legislative, what we see is if the reaction goes, the Foulon win. Well, that kind of makes sense. The Foulon are reactionary, and so are the Marais. That means they have to, between them, have more players who have 25 or more victory points than the other side. The problem is, as long as nobody's really powerful, and 25 is a hard number of victory points to get, that's the amount that if the Royalists get, they win automatically. It almost automatically falls into a reactionary regime, because the Girondins, Montagne, and Sans-Culotte, if none of them break 25, then it's automatically that. And then the Foulon win. On the other hand, one of the people who wants to be in that position is the Marais. And, oh, I'm sorry, they do not win. Ah, there we go. There we go. Okay, I missed that. Yeah. So this is the thing. The Marais have a chance of winning in this position if the reactionary goes forward and they have more points than the Foulon. And the Foulon's the other way around. For the revolution, if that goes in, the Girondins win. Now, the Marais have that position in just about every single form of government. And I think there's some where they may hold... no, I guess not. I'm not sure... There are some cases where they automatically win. For example, in the Terror, if the reaction wins. But that's going to be a hard sell. Anyway, what I've seen in the game is it's very, very difficult for the people over here on the right-hand side of the board to ever get a victory. Because the Marais and the Foulon control a lot of power at the beginning of the game, and they don't have a strong reason to avoid the status quo. The one thing that changes that is if the Marais decide that the Foulon are doing too well, then they can try to push things further along. When they do, the Girondins become very, very powerful for about a turn. And this is very historical. It's really tough. I think I've almost managed it once to keep them in power. So I've kept thinking that by installing the Federal Republic, rather than getting a war started or something, which makes them in real trouble. So I've been considering whether or not that the Girondins want to try and avoid pushing things into the convention until the last turn of the game. I don't think I'm going to try to play that this time, but that's the kind of weird machinations to take place. It's really hard to get things into the terror even, and that's where the Montagne and the Sans-Culotte want it. You really have to push the game hard in ways that the players don't necessarily want to go. Primarily the Marais don't necessarily want to go there. And they're the ones who are going to stop you. And the Girondins definitely do not want it. Now, on paper, it looks like there's a good chance for everyone. It really does. In reality, I have seen most of the victories in the Marais' hands, just because they always have the linchpin. Every turn, they kind of have the option of helping the revolution along, and by doing so, just trashing the person who was their main competition. Makes the 5-player game, or maybe it's the 4-player game. I know some of the games reduce players. I think the 5-player game gets rid of the Sans-Culotte, who are pretty damn, it puts them under the Montagne. I think that makes it a lot easier. And then the 4-player game, I think, gets rid of the Marais entirely, which is really, really a pleasing idea. It makes them into sort of a neutral that's controlled by other people. And I've played that once, and the Marais won. Even though they weren't playing. That's the only problem with that. Alright. Of course, they historically won. Definitely have seen the Royalists win. The Foulon have a hard time because it looks really good early on, and especially if they work out an agreement with the Marais, it looks like they can just keep it in the legislative the whole game. And I've seen games go that way, never to the Foulon's victory, because the Marais are the swing vote there. But once they get knocked out of their chance in the legislative section, it's really hard for them to get back up. They have to put it into... They really have to do some fancy maneuvers to get up there. Alright, I have used up a huge amount of time on this one, but I think this game definitely deserves it, and we'll be hitting the playing very soon.